Uh, Sean, we've got 6 Daftmills to work through tonight. This isn't like some of those crazy Glendronach tastings we did in the past where we would do like 8 sherry bomb Glendronachs that were fun but totally destroyed your palate and were like almost indistinguishable from one another at the end. These are mostly a little bit more naked, American oak matured, little softer, probably fruitier, a little bit more spirit driven whiskeys. And we've tried them all at various points, but this is the first time we'll have tried them all together, which should be fun.
Yeah, I'm totally excited about that. I'm sorry, I had something in my head. You could.
Well, if it's important, as my mother would say, it'll come back to you. So, anyway, the lineup, obviously the Cask Strength ones we've put towards the end. The Kensington one, because it's a single cask, we felt probably made more sense to do on its own as opposed to the 15-year, which is a marriage. But we are going to start everything off with the 2007. And partly we're going to do that because I'm sure all of you would like to have whiskey. You don't want to just hear us talking at you from a screen for a bit, but I do have some photos about Daftmill, and we're going to share you a bit of the story as we go through too. So I'm going to try and sprinkle that in a little bit. But I guess before we go any further, let's wrap our noses around the Daftmill 2007 winter batch release. I'll share it on the screen here with you. So here we go. This is the one we're talking about. It's sold out. We don't have this anymore. Bottled at 46%, 12 years of age. You know, it's funny, the relevant facts even, you forget about them because it's been a while. In fact, it's been so long since we had this that we didn't put the tasting note on the section of the site where we typically put the tasting notes. But 20, what does it say? First fill ex-bourbon barrels. So it's all first fill ex-bourbon, bottled at 46%, non-chill filtered, no added coloring. I'll share the link here with you that goes to our archive where you can see the bottle for yourself. But Sean, do you want to get us started off with this one?
Well, as you mentioned, like it's very like they're all fairly spirit forward, and this is definitely no exception. I was kind of curious, like when we got all these, there was like the first one that you had in the store, you only had like a case. And do you remember if that was this one?
No, it's not. And I'm glad you asked that because that one, actually, we do have a handful of bottles that we are going to offer for sale. So no, it's not that release specifically, but we will get to that in a moment or in a few moments. I believe it's one of the other 2008s. And I'll confirm that. I'll confirm that when we get there, but I'm pretty sure it's the summer 2008. And you're right. We only received 6 bottles of it. We received them. I don't even remember when we received them, but it was kind of an afterthought. And I didn't want to open the can of worms. We knew we were getting a bigger allotment of the second release. And so we just felt it was better to not release those bottles, hang on to them. Ultimately, we've been able to save some of them for the tasting, this tasting, and presumably for some others moving forward. But I may make 2 of them available by ballot tonight. We'll see. I guess people just need to butter me up and say nice things over the course of the tasting, and then maybe that's what we'll do with them. But you're right, Sean. The first release we got, we had only 2 bottles or 6 bottles, and I was like, well, I don't know what to do with this, because if I even let people know I have this, it's the first Daftmill to come to Canada, and there's only 6, people are going to be mad. And as it turned out, when we started getting subsequent releases, and we might get 20 or 30 cases of it, and we were the only retailer that got it, there was other retailers yelling at the importer because they didn't get it. So imagine if we'd released those 6 bottles for sale, people would have been mad. They would have said silly things. People would have written songs and recorded videos and sent them to my staff begging for them, and it would have made everybody just look really foolish ultimately. So we hung on to them. Interesting on the nose here, like to me, it's got kind of like a cheese and fruit plate from like a wine tasting where you've got like, it's almost like there's soft fruit tones there, kind of soft cheeses. So it's got that fruit and the funk that I love, but the more I get into it, it starts to become much more grain forward.
More wood forward too, like that lacing of oak and a bit of char on there starts to kind of poke up. It's almost like after you swirl a bit, those fruits kind of fade away a little bit.
Mhm. But yeah, nice approachable nose. It's clean. This is a young whiskey, ultimately a 12-year-old whiskey. Most of what we're trying here tonight is relatively young, but it's enticing. It's fun. What do you get on the palate? Oh, I don't know how you can't love that. Just first sip right off the bat. It's creamy, cheesy, fruity. There's a little bit of sweet in there, some soft floral tones, and then that barley again, that really lush malty barley comes through in the back end. And it's so light and so delicate.
Oh man, it's like yeah, it's like fresh ricotta and some like squeezed lemon juice on top, and maybe you're making like a pasta out of it or something. No sauce yet though, just the ricotta and like a dumpling.
Oh, the ricotta is a good call. And I think maybe drizzled with like a little bit of honey on top, um, to give it that nice little touch of sweetness as well. So for those of you who are sampling Daftmill for the first time, maybe there are some of you, hopefully not. I mean, we've been trying to throw this in tasting. Sammy's first time, I saw one hand. I don't have, admittedly, everybody in gallery view because, you know, you wouldn't want us sharing your images on Facebook or YouTube later on when we eventually put these tastings up. So Sean and I are the only two people who are going to appear on screen. So I can't see all of your reactions, but if Sean's got it gallery view, maybe he can keep track of some of that stuff. This is a distillery I've been excited about for more than a decade. I got into whiskey in a real sense work-wise in 2003, and I made my first trip to Scotland in, I believe it was 2005 or 2006. And when I first got started, I had this idea that I was going to try to visit every single distillery in Scotland, and I've come pretty close. I've visited a lot of them. But it wasn't until about 2010 when I'd been to Islay several times, I'd been to the Space Side a couple of times, that I started hunting for all the other distilleries that maybe weren't on the beaten path, the ones that only produced for blends and didn't have visitor centers. And I started trying to knock off some of those. And it was shortly after Kilchoman, probably 2 or 3 years into having Kilchoman in the market, that I realized that, there's a whole other distillery that opened at the same time as Kilchoman that nobody's talking about. And it's this farmer who's making whiskey in small quantities. He doesn't want to talk to anybody. He doesn't want any visitors. And he's not going to sell a drop of it until it's 10, 12 years of age. And I just got fascinated by that. And I don't remember who set up my first tour there, my first visit there. And I've only been there twice. But I had to be vouched for by someone basically to go see this guy. He's a hardworking guy. He's making whiskey. He's running his farm. He's not got visions of global domination. The distillery produces something stupid like 1/5000th what Glenfiddich produces in terms of production on an annual basis. And he doesn't care if people thinks he should do more or things different. He's just doing his own thing, and he's refining it and tweaking it as he goes. And I think it was the Berry Brothers guys who introduced me. And I first went there, I want to say sometime around 2012, 2011 or 2012 was my first visit. And I had a cool tour. It was pissing rain. He only had one building that was serving as a warehouse. And I'll show a couple slides here, a couple photos of the distillery from my trip in June. So that's the entrance, nice sort of bucolic entrance. And these are the old farm buildings. And the funny thing about these farm buildings is no one knows how old they are. They're, at the very least, parts of them are centuries old. The farm has been around for about 1,000 years. And the building off to the right here, not this one here on the left, which is where he was milling his barley and still milling his barley, but this one off to the right was the cask store back in the day. You can see that old building there. There's a pagoda roof on it. I didn't ask him about that, but I'm pretty sure it was purely just put there so that it looks like a distillery. This building here was serving as the warehouse, and it was absolutely stuffed with casks. And I was hooked. I was fascinated by it. I remember probably 2014 or 2015, Berry Brothers and Rudd was named. They were going to be responsible for all of Daftmill's bottlings and export, which is not to say the Berry Brothers guys are actually choosing the casks and putting the blends together. And I mean, if you're doing a vatting of casks, more than one cask, it's a blend of that single malt. Patrick's doing this. This is his baby. He's literally doing everything, the whole stage of the process. He's had an intern once, and he doesn't want, like I asked him about this, he doesn't want employees. He doesn't, want to have a night shift because he doesn't trust that whoever does this will do as good a job as he's going to do, or at least do it the way he wants and be consistent. The guy is so stubborn, it's charming about his approach to all of this. It's a very old school approach to it. And I think the approach is, well, the farm's doing well, the distillery's doing well. That's good enough. I just want to keep making it better. I don't want to make more. I don't want to work more hours, work harder. And trust me, this guy works plenty hard. He probably pulls 80-hour weeks every single week, but he just has this vision, and the vision, there's no compromise for the vision on it. And there's something pretty charming and very cool about that. So around 2015, something like that, Berry Brothers and Rudd was appointed to be his exporter. They were going to control distribution of his whiskey. And it was probably around 2016, 2017, when the first bottles started coming out, that Berry Brothers approached me and said, Andrew, I know you've always been interested in Daftmill. You've been to the distillery. Here's the deal. Daftmill is going to come to Canada, but you're the only one who's going to get it. And it went back to that curious young dude showing up at the distillery that doesn't have a visitor center, that doesn't really welcome visitors. I mean, literally feels like when you go on a farm and the farmer pulls out his shotgun to hint to you to leave. It's not quite like that, but he doesn't want people showing up. He gets people showing up every day, but he doesn't want to do that because that's just time taken away from making whiskey, which makes his day longer. And he's selling everything he's making right now. He doesn't need that kind of attention. And what I do love, though, is that, this is a guy who had this idea that I'm going to make whiskey, but I'm not going to release it till I'm ready. And for those who don't appreciate this, like starting a distillery, the equipment's expensive. Like even for a tiny distillery like Daftmill, probably $500,000 to $1 million just in equipment. And then, sure, he's got his own barley, so maybe he's not paying for that, but he's still got to buy casks, heat, light, power, all those different things. You're laying this stuff down for over a decade before you're going to sell a drop of it. And he never wavered from that. The distillery only makes as much whiskey as the farm can support. So if the farm doesn't have a good year, they don't make that much whiskey. He makes, I believe, about 1,000 tons of barley on the farm every year. This is barley specifically grown for whiskey making. And about 1/10 of that is what's used to make Daftmill whiskey. It's malted at a local maltster and then brought back to the distillery. It's a very, very controlled and unique distillery. Like there's truly no one else like this with this kind of stubborn vision, and it's pretty cool. I see several of you commenting on it. People talking about hints of cinnamon and amaretto. It is definitely not the Cairn or Macallan, James. Cantaloupe, yeah, there's some nice soft fruit notes there. To me, most of these Daftmill bottlings have a bit of that like citrus tones, melon fruits. Like you're really going down that starburst fruit candies corridor of aromas and flavors. And there are some nice spices there. And I'm picking that up more now too. Like that oak is adding a nice crisp spice character to it. Ginger, cinnamon, nutmeg, some nice cool tones there. Sean, you getting anything else you want to share?
That was mostly it for that one. I kind of want to save the rest for a second pass through, to be honest, because that one, like, I can't remember if we opened that or I can't remember if I tasted it, but it is a cracker, that one. Holy moly.
Well, I mean, I'm just looking at the site here. Either it didn't carry over, or, maybe this was one of those ones that came in during COVID. We were just so busy that it flew off the shelf. We didn't bother or didn't have time to write a tasting note for it because I don't see one. I just don't see one on there. But yeah, it's a lovely whiskey. It's just a beautiful expression, shows really well. And I think this is a whiskey because it's kind of naked that sort of gets better as it's left in the glass to open up a little bit and evolve. Because, most of these have got first fill bourbon in them to some extent, but if you look at them and if you look at the color, they're not extractive. These are not whiskeys that are insanely dark. The oak is not dominant. It's really more about the spirit. Question: what is the origin story of Daftmill? So great question, Rich. I'm going to come back to that one after the next whiskey, just to keep this rolling around. Because the origin story is every bit as, strangely charming as the way that he chooses to make whiskey. So let's move on to the Daftmill Winter 2008 batch release. Also first fill ex bourbon and 46%. Oh no, we're on to the summer one, aren't we? Sorry.
This is Daftmill 2008 summer. Yeah.
Daftmill 2008 summer. So this is the one that actually we never released, Sean. This is the one that 2008 summer. Yeah, this is the one that none of us have tried before. So we're all trying this together for the first time tonight. I'm just going to go pull it up because I've got to actually pull this up from another source because and I'm pretty sure this was, do you remember, this is the global one, isn't it? Not the UK one.
That I'm not sure.
What does it say on the label? I think they put some of those notes.
That I might have.
Or the photo. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Bottled at 46% again. First fill ex bourbon casks. I have a feeling it's this one here. It's the international, the one that was 1,780 bottles. So I'll share my screen for you. This is the one here that we're talking about. Only 6 bottles came to Canada, so we never bothered opening it up. And in fact, we didn't even bother selling it because I didn't want to annoy people. So it's quite a bit more crisp than the last one. But
I'm getting a bit more of that bourbon like influence on it, like the actual old spirit on there. Might be slightly fresher barrel, maybe.
Yeah. Well, not only is the bourbon like that spice is there, like that crisp sort of American oak spice is coming through, but I'm also getting like a crisper barley note from this whiskey too. And nuttier, like, so more in like that macadamia nuts, almonds, marzipan notes coming from it too. It seems kind of more decadent, more peppery, less floral. I think the fruits are still there, but they're not leaping out as much. I think, as you said, because of that bourbon influence.
Adam was asking if they do anything in sherry. they
Mhm.
like, well, so as and Travis spoke up and said that 2009, that's true. There was also funny enough, like the original cast that we were offered was also supposed to be sherry, and I'm quite sure Barry's decided to keep that one for themselves.
Sure. Oh yeah, the one that the cask we were offered. So
Yeah.
um, apparently that was just an honest mix-up. I mean, in some ways, Sean, it was a bit of a blessing because I mean, if we'd had a fresh sherry but a Daftmill, and it was a gorgeous, gorgeous whiskey, as good as it was, that might have been a lot for us to sell on our own. Like for a relatively unknown distillery, sure, it's got a bit of a cult following. We actually had people calling from Europe trying to order bottles 7 or 8 months before it even landed. Especially the Dutch. The Dutch were very persistent about making sure that we set aside bottles for them. But yeah, we were offered that sherry butt, and it was, I mean, if I remember, it was like kind of a thick, gooey, sherried bottling. Like, and it would have been cool, but we still got a cool cask, which we're going to get back to. But yeah, they do some sherry. I think some of the batches they've released have been a marriage of bourbon and sherry, but I think mostly what we've seen, and most of what Francis Evans, not Francis Evans, most of what Francis fills is ex-bourbon, because it's consistent, it's good. Yeah, it's the right type of cask for the spirit. I mean, sherry, one of the things to keep in mind with sherry is sherry can be very big, bold. It can add a lot of tannins. And in that respect, it can really kind of overwhelm the spirit. So it's something I think you really have to be careful with some of these lighter whiskeys. And I guess what we didn't mention and what we haven't talked about yet how this is a lowland single malt. It's somewhat traditional. It's not traditional in the lowland sense of the word, of like triple distilled, going really, really floral, but it is a lighter, cleaner style single malt. So anyway, Sean, any other thoughts on this second bottling?
At first on the, well, going from the nose to the palate, I didn't think it was going to lean into the cheese on this one, but there actually still is a little bit on the palate, which is kind of fun. I do feel even on the palate leans a little bit more towards like something caramelized, maybe not caramel in general, but something that was cooked a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's got that nutty Francis Cuthbert. I don't know why that was not jumping to my head. I should have just looked at the bottle because I'm sure his name's on the bottle somewhere. It is more kind of caramel, nutty, almost getting towards like pecan pie or butter tarts on the palate. That cheesy funk is still there. I think those fruits are still there too, but I think in the case with this one, the oak is just a lot more intense. And it's sort of more oak forward than the last one.
Seems a little fattier this one too, like a little bit more thicker on the palate, which is kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that would be kind of interesting, looking at a small distillery like Daftmill, where, I mean, he's really, Francis is really distilling in the off season from farming. And the spirit he lays down in the winter and summer could be quite different, especially if his fermentation times are running similar lengths, but at different times a year when the temperature, the humidity, all those factors are a little bit different. And one of the things that would be interesting to know about these winter 2007, summer bottlings is, I wonder if they're choosing casks that were filled in the winter and summer respectively as well too, just to show kind of a different side of the spirit. So the origin story about Daftmill and the Cuthbert family goes back. The family is in its fourth generation as farmers. They've only owned Daftmill Farm though since I think the 70s, somewhere around that point in time. But the family's been involved in farming for a very long time. The farm itself can be traced back almost 1,000 years. So they've been farming at Daftmill Farm for about 1,000 years now, which is really incredible. And the origin story of why Francis makes whiskey is quite simply, there was a period in the early 2000s when demand for barley was low, the prices were depressed. And as a farmer, he just simply asked himself one day, could we make more money from our barley if we distilled it, put it in casks, and sold it as whiskey down the line? And I mean, as kind of crazy as that sounds, like that was where it all started. Was he and his brother were talking, and they weren't happy with the prices they were getting for their barley. So they decided, maybe we should put a distillery on the farm and make our own whiskey, and then we'll get that value added portion of the process. And I mean, it's such a crazy concept, because again, like, you talk to anybody who started a distillery from scratch, the folks behind Aaron, Anthony Wills at Kilchoman. I mean, these things are money pits for decades before they pay themselves off. And this guy not only managed to do this as a part of running the farming operation and without, taking capital from the farming operation, but he managed to do it, and do it without selling a drop of whiskey for a dozen years. I mean, it's frankly insane. Brook Laddie, when it was brought back to life, like, nearly went bust several times because they kept running out of money as they were waiting for their spirit they were producing to mature and come of age. Aaron had to be refinanced a couple times. Kilchoman had to go back and find more investors many times, because it's a very, very expensive way to do things. But this one family and their family farm, where the one guy basically does everything when he's not busy doing everything else at the farm, managed to make a go of it. And it's really incredible. The biggest production year he ever had was 2020. And it was because of COVID. There was no socializing, people weren't going out. So he figured, well, if I'm around home, I might as well make whiskey. And I think in the years leading up to COVID, he had been allowing more people to come and visit the distillery and show them around. And what he realized is all those things, all those people coming, not all of them, I mean, maybe there'd be 1 or 2 parties a week that might come and see him for an hour or two. All those things just took away time from making whiskey and meant that he made less whiskey. So he just said, like, I'm just cutting that out. We're just not going to do that. So I asked him if he had a vision in mind for the type of whiskey he wanted to make. And it was really, no, he just wanted to make something that was good and something that he'd be happy drinking. He drank single malts like Glenmorangie, Glenlivet, all the ones that everyone else would have been drinking in the early 2000s. And he just thought, what, I'm pretty sure I can make a good whiskey. So he went about and did it. And he did it at a time when there weren't really many other companies looking at doing this. Like Kilchoman and Daftmill were the only 2 distilleries to open at the early part of the 21st century until I think the 2010s. Other than like maybe a big company opening in Elsa Bay or something like that up, I think it was one of only 2 distilleries, and they didn't sell anything for a dozen years. I'll go through, I've got some photos from inside the distillery too. So Tyler, good question about where to source his casks. Well, it just so happens that Speyside Cooperage has a branch of their operation only about 30 minutes from Daftmill Farm. In fact, the port where the casks arrive has a branch of Speyside Cooperage there. And Patrick just has this relationship with them where they let him know they've got a fresh batch of casks. He drives his cattle trailer up to the cooperage and hand selects the casks he wants. And he only takes as many casks as will fit into his trailer. And then he hauls them back to the distillery and, fills them over the space of the weeks ahead. I mean, everything about how this place is run is practical. It's not about, efficiencies or economies of scale. It's, well, I can make enough spirit in my stills every day to fill 1 bourbon barrel. So he knows how many barrels he needs for however many days of production he's got planned. Occasionally he'll buy sherry butts if they've got good ones and they're fresh, but I think probably this guy is just, they probably love the fact that everybody else they're dealing with are these big players that are probably pushing them on margins and price and whatnot, and don't actually care about the individual barrels they get. They're just looking for a volume of casks. And here comes this farmer with his cattle trailer who's going to hand pick the what he thinks are the best bourbon barrels from the bunch. I mean, it's again, it's just such an unusual story for what the rest of the industry is and how the rest of the industry operates. And I'm just going to pull up my notes on my phone here. I hand wrote a bunch of notes because there's some other little nuggets in there that I'm sure some of you will find kind of interesting. But until then, shall we move on to the, is it the winter 2008? Is that the next one we're on to?
Yeah. Oh, wait, winter. Yeah.
Winter 2008. So I'll find the page.
And it seems like we're going back into slightly more spirit driven one, like the first one.
Nice. All right. So unfortunately, I couldn't share the link for the last one because we didn't have a page on our site, but this is for the third one, and I'll pop it up. So this is the winter batch release. And this one I do have tasting notes of because presumably it arrived at a point where I had a bit more time and decided to write it up. And there it's there. You can see signature on the bottle. Is it actually Francis? Oh, it's Ian Cuthbert, Francis and Ian Cuthbert. So Ian's his brother. I'm not sure what Ian's relationship is with the whiskey making. I do get the impression that it's all Francis's endeavors. 6,000 total bottles released. You know, some of you have noted if you go on to Whiskey Base, there's some confusing because sometimes it's hard to tell if you've got the European bottling or the North American bottling or the Asian bottling. But Sean, what do we think? You're saying more spirit driven than the last one?
Well, yeah, relatively. Like it's a little fresher again. It goes back into those whiter, cleaner fruits. There is like I don't know, like an eclair like note on there where it's kind of creamy and pastry driven too.
Yeah, for me, like lots of white chocolate, and I agree. There's like some pastry tones, s'mores, like marshmallow and chocolate, maybe some graham wafer as well. But that cheddar tone is still in there. The honey, I think the fruits are showing through a little bit more in this one than they were in the last one. But we're staying predominantly in like that white orchard fruit territory, apples, pears, maybe straying a bit into like apricots and melons.
I guess this is the kind of bottle that, or the kind of releases that if they're all going to be somewhat like that, then you might not have a bunch of them on your shelf, but you might like kind of go through them one by one.
But once again, on the palate with this one, like it's juicy, it's waxy. There's some nice fruit tones in there. I'm loving that cheesy funk that comes through again. I'm just looking at fermentation. It varies between 96 and 120 hours. So quite long fermentations compared to much of the industry that's usually in that 40 to 72 hour range. And those longer fermentations are going to definitely push you into that more kind of fruity, funky style of spirit.
I feel the 46% on this one a little bit more heftily. It's a little bit more poignant. Pretty cool.
Well, I think it was Travis. Someone made a comment earlier with the first one about, well, yeah, it's unpeated. It's 46%, but he felt that the spirit had a bit of weight to it and had a bit of body to it. And I think this one does too. One of the notes in my original tasting note, and I think this one has it over a bit more so than the last two, is it's got a bit of this kind of waxiness to it on the palate and on the finish.
Yeah, it's a good call. Absolutely. I wonder if those same floral notes will start popping up like the first one when you kind of let it sit and oxidize a little bit.
I'm already starting to get that. Like, I'm already starting to get a bit of that on there. That barley tone's coming through, and I'm getting even a bit of like a flinty, or even almost a faintly metallic sort of note coming through on the palate as well too. This is whiskey that just, to me, it tastes good. It's not overly complicated. It's pleasant. I mean, for a nice day, nice summer sipping dram. I mean, these whiskeys have all got a very approachable palate and mouthfeel to them.
I've seen like discussions on Reddit and such too, and like people talking about like why the price, what it is, and I mean, I don't know. Yeah, there's definitely like that level of beakiness to it that it's really easy to kind of drink, and of course you can tell the quality right away. But with the exception of like the floor malting, is pretty much the definition of like farm to glass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, James is talking about the cast numbers, so you can easily match with whiskey base. If I had the bottles in front of me, James, that would be a very easy thing for me to do, but unfortunately I don't. Yeah, Sean, a lot of people, you can talk about the price of the whiskey, and it's pricier than a lot of other young whiskeys, but it immediately sells out, especially in Europe, and it's 2 or 3 times the price on auction sites, and it doesn't really show any sign of abating. And I think one of the things that's kind of interesting about it is because it's such small quantities. I mean, we're talking maybe he's releasing 30,000 bottles a year. I'd be shocked if it's that high. That doesn't go very far in a world where, the big guys are releasing well over 1 million bottles of whiskey every year. And so, a small number of people can very quickly and very easily lap it all up. But yeah, I think one of the pricing in whiskey is so interesting because people are willing to pay more for like good stories and good provenance and, quirky things like the fact that this guy doesn't want you to visit his distillery. You mean that, let's be honest. I mean, I think that's one of those things where there's never going to be enough Daftmill to go around, to the point where, I mean, the only reason we still have it is because the Canadian allocation is going through one shop. Whereas, you go to the UK and, most shops only get like 3 or 4 6-packs of the 15-year. And so, I mean, people here probably don't appreciate like how scarce it actually is, because it looks like we've always got a release. Like, I think the 15 showed up just after we sold out our single cask, or a month or 2 after it. So it looks like we've always got some Daftmill, but it's because we're the only place in Canada that's got it. Yeah, it's there. To me, I love the stories behind brands. I was on Skye and I went to visit Torvig, and Torvig is going to come to Canada in January, which is really cool. We're going to be able to start seeing their releases, but they've also got like a almost frustratingly stubborn way that they're going to do things. They're releasing 4 whiskeys until they hit 10 years. Those 4 whiskeys will be available until they're gone, and then it'll be replaced. The first one will be replaced by the second, and the second by the third. They've got no plans to do single casts. They've got no plans to do limited editions. And this is just how they're going to do it. And their whiskeys are, in a lot of the markets they're in, are selling out. And again, I think it's partly because when people understand the story and kind of the planning and the thought behind everything, I mean, Torvig is this curious little distillery, on an island, like in, the remote northwest corner of Scotland. And the way they're doing things is very 19th century, like their approach to making whiskey. And I think that kind of authenticity and weight carries something and adds something to it. So Francis was never going to try to outcompete Glenfiddich 12 on price, but he doesn't have to. So that's just how it goes. Maybe I'll show a couple more photos here before we move on. Sean, has it gotten floral for you? I know you were wondering about that.
maybe not quite as much, but that's all right.
Not as much as the first one, but it's sort of in that, more in that direction than the second.
Oh man. Coming from a place that's like sherried out, those are just like such treats. I just love that style. Ugh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and people who probably, they hear this a little too much from us now. You know, we talk a lot about, I know yourself, Kurt, Harmony, myself, you know, we all really love ex-bourbon casks because ex-bourbon casks actually let the individual personality of the whiskeys creep in. I love a good sherry cask, but you know, you heavily sherry two different Speyside or Highland whiskeys, and they get to a point where they're almost indistinguishable. Like it'd be very hard to pick some of them apart. But with like a lighter touch from bourbon cask, you can definitely get that. I do like Adam's comment here. If I'm dropping hard-earned money on whiskey, I definitely want someone who really cares about the product so deeply. I mean, if you think about the way that a lot of food and drinks culture has gone in North America in the last decade, I mean, people care about relationships and passion and the story. There's value in that. And a lot of people are willing to pay for that. And if the quality's there and the authenticity is there, why not? All right, photos. Promised you some photos. So I'm going to take you back to, we'll start with the mill. I think I've got a couple of photos of Patrick when he wasn't paying attention. He probably didn't want me taking a photo of him, but what are you going to do? Now, when I first visited the distillery, again, sometime in the early 2010s, they didn't have this yet. It's their mill. The barley was arriving, I believe, pre-milled and in bags at that time, which is not that unusual. Edredauer, I believe, was having, and some other distilleries, I think Aaron even, back in the day, in the late 2000s, their barley was coming pre-milled, or I might be confusing them with someone. A lot of the smaller distilleries do that because sometimes it was maybe more convenient or more consistent. But Daftmill does have its own mill now. This is the outside of the room where they do mashing and fermentation, and you can see that's the little chute that the draft goes down once they've done a mash. There's the mash tun, and as I said, I'm just going to open this up so I've got my notes here because I did make notes. Yeah, Patrick. So apparently Patrick milled the barley by hand on a different part of the farm originally, and he would transport it in basically garbage bins from one part of the farm to the other. So this was all about putting in that mill, was all about making the process more efficient and less labor on his body. The barley is malted by an old maltster in Alloa, and the mash, he'll do 2 to 3 mashes a week, depending on how many days of distillation he's doing. But essentially, the mash he's got there will fill two. I think it fills 2 ferment. It fills 1 washback, and then that 1 washback will do 2 distillations, essentially, in terms of production. So his entire production is built around being able to do 6 days of production in a week. So again, this guy, he's not a slacker. He's a very, very hardworking guy. I'd asked him about this and said, are you any plans to grow the business? He said he was happy about the style. He was happy about the niche that he was in. And he's got no plans to grow the business. He just wants to make the product he's making more consistent. And like, while I was there, he was writing copious notes about different stages, like tracking how much alcohol he was getting from the fermentation, what the sugar concentration was. This is inside the mash tun. What the sugar concentration was coming out of the mash. This is jumping over into the still room now. This will be the wash still, the first distillation. Very small stills, but you'll note they've got a line arm that's angled up. So all these things to kind of create a lighter, more delicate style of spirit. And then the slightly smaller spirit still off on the other side of the room, again, with a line arm that's angled up. and that's to encourage having a much more light, delicate spirit. Couple of close-ups on the stills. There's the spirit safe, which, you know, he even said, you know, back at the time when he built his distillery, he didn't need to put it in. And if he did it again, he might not have put it in because it's not really a necessary piece of equipment. You can, you know, do this in different ways, but it's there. The other thing one of the reasons he gave for not wanting to bring anyone in or hire someone to help him was that, like, he knows where all the valves are and when they need to be turned at which points. And I mean, he barely stopped moving for more than a minute the whole time I was in there. He would always be off, and it was by sound. He could tell by, you know, what sound the stills were at, how close they were to finishing their run. You know, if he had a pump running something, he could tell by the sound or the vibrations the pump was making how close that was being done, and he knew that he'd have to duck over and quickly turn a valve or two. This is the spirits receiver, so I think he fills casks about once a week. But basically, once this thing fills up, then he'll fill his 5 or 6 bourbon barrels for the week. This is the fermentation room, so those are the fermentation tanks. And there you can see some water, some wort coming off the mash tun. And there's Francis there looking at the underback, checking to make sure that everything's running perfectly smoothly. He's in his overalls. We'll maybe pause it there for a moment. Don't know how many more photos I've got, but yeah, no, James, I think he's predominantly filling bourbon barrels. You know, hogsheads, and I think I'd even asked him about this. I think he wants fresh bourbon barrels, right? You know, undumped with a little bit of liquid left in them. So what are called wet fills. Much of the industry likes to rely on bourbon barrels that are stripped apart, flat packed, and put in shipping containers because you can fit more of them into a container. And then when they arrive in Scotland, the staves are tapered so that you could make, by adding more staves, a hogshead, which is a larger cask from a bourbon barrel. And I don't think he's for that. I think he's predominantly using like fresh wet fill bourbon barrels as opposed to recoopered hogsheads. Yes, Daftmill is a Daft Punk reference. That's a good one. One of the comments he made was that he's got 3 warehouses. They're on other parts of his farm now, and he's quickly running out of space. And I think he said he's going to have to build one more warehouse. But I think he figures he's going to get to a point in the next few years where he starts making as much whiskey every year as he's actually selling, so that he gets to a point where he's not going to need vastly more warehouse space. And again, this is a practicality thing. As I said, he's not planning to hold on to this stuff forever. I think he likes the way his whiskeys drink in that 10 to 15 year range. And while there may be some older bottlings, I think those are the sort of the sweet spots where he's planning to bottle whiskeys. And, you know, it's not something that he's got in his mind to release an 80-year-old whiskey someday. I think he's trying to build a sustainable business around these 10 to 15-year-old whiskeys. Yeah, Steve's asking 50,000 liters. It's actually below that. I think normally it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30,000 liters a year. I think, and I don't know if I wrote a note on there. At one point, I think he'd managed to produce somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 or 45, but 30,000 is typically where, you know, about their annual production, somewhere between 20 and 30,000 liters of pure spirit.
I think I've read somewhere something like 100 barrels a year or so.
100 barrels a year. I mean, 100 barrels a year, if you think, just do the quick math, like that's about 20,000, isn't it? Liters of spirit. Multiply, yeah, 200 by 100, you get about 20,000.
Maybe that, yeah.
Yeah, so somewhere between 25 and 30, I think, is because he does fill about 5 to 10 sherry butts as well now, I think. but it
So
depends on.
that's kind of interesting then. If he's gonna do a steady state with a full warehouse of selling as much as he produces kind of thing, then we might end up seeing an increase in release volume in the future then.
You might, yeah. Might, but I guess time will tell. But yeah, everything about this is very practical. When I got there, his daughter was helping him with some casks. I think she was helping him fill casks. She quickly disappeared. I think she was embarrassed that she was being seen working in overalls at his distillery. She was home from school for the day, so she'd been put to work. But I think he's got 2 children, and neither of them have this idea of running the distillery that one day. So it'll be interesting to see what the long-term plan for it is, because right now the guy just seems to be happy making whiskey. And he started making whiskey because he loved whiskey and wasn't happy with the price he was getting for barley, and thought maybe we could do that ourselves and keep a little extra. All right, let's let's move on to the Daftmill 2009 summer edition. I will pull up the relevant, it's got a B on it, so that's how I'll find it on the site.
It's so blatantly different, that guy. When you're trying, I knew one of them had some sherry in it, and we were trying to figure out the order, and I was like, well, maybe that one towards like before we start getting to the two
And it
cooler,
is
more
this
unique
one.
ones. Yeah. And like as soon as you opened the little container, I was like, I'm pretty darn sure that would be it there.
Well, just
But,
one,
man.
definitely when you nose it now, it's got a little bit of that meaty, kind of meaty note coming off of it. So I'll share the link and I will put it up on the screen. So this is it, the 2009 summer batch release 2020, 11 years of age, 46%. This time around, we got the Asia release. So we got a portion of that matured in bourbon and first fill sherry casks. And there you go. The bottle is over on the left there. And bring that back down. And then, yeah, what do we get for tasting notes on this? It has some of that like honey and fruit and cheesy funk, but it's also got like leather and sort of earthy spices and kind of dunnage, mushroomy dunnage notes.
Yeah, a lot more spice compared to the other two, or the other three. They're like really kind of maybe leaning a little into like cola, a little bit like the cola, like the spices, not necessarily just the drink.
Sammy saying agrees with those meaty notes. Yeah, it's quite spicy, quite peppery, almost hot. Yeah. The palate, I mean, I think the sherry on this is probably a pretty light touch. I mean, maybe one sherry butt was mixed in with a handful of bourbon barrels, because to me, it's still more bourbon driven on the palate than it is sherry dominant.
Super silky too. Like this is I mentioned like the impact of the alcohol in the previous three. This one I feel is a little lower. It's got a bit
some
more
nice
of that
oils and that fattiness you were talking about in one of the previous ones. Like it's got that in the body. And you're right, it's silky. But yeah, the alcohol just sort of disappears on this one. What about the grain? I mean, to me, the finish, this is really all about it's tons of barley, tons of kind of flinty notes on the finish.
I find the finish, the sherry almost impacts it almost like more so. Like there's still there's Yeah, there's still some nice barley on there, but I'm actually like it almost seems richer on the finish than it did on the mid palate.
Mm.
Interesting. I think earlier Travis mentioned that there might be a hint of sulfur on it, but I have to, truth be told, I'm somewhat blind. I'm half blind to sulfur. So half the time I can pick it up, half the time I'm completely blind to it.
One, yeah, I mean, I'm somewhat like that as well, Sean, but then I would also say that I add in one other element, which is I forgive it in some circumstances because I think sometimes frankly, it works. And especially if it's not like a blatant flaw, and again, when we go down that sulfur road, we can start talking about spirit sulfur where they're intentionally trying to make a meaty sulfury spirit, which in the case of Daftmill, they're not. Like this is not that type of spirit, but you could also be getting that sulfur coming from the grain. Like sulfur is something that occurs in the soil. I mean, it's things that plants need to grow. And for me, it had that faint meaty whiff at the start. But I don't think there's sulfur on this to my palate. And I think sometimes people smell things that are often associated with heavily sulfured casks. And that's like maybe an early warning sign for a sulfur note, but maybe someone can get some on this. I mean, Kurt's the only sulfur evangelist we have in the shop. We'd have to get his nose on this one to see what he thinks, but I don't think there's one there.
No, I'm not really picking up. And either way, like it's a nice difference from the first three there. Like it's so night and day that it's just overall. I mean, you're tasting the same spirit, but with a bit of sherry to it. It's just fantastic either way.
Yeah, I mean, the sherry does add a nice component to it. It's bringing in some of those chocolate tones, leather, earthy notes, kind of firmer spices as well too. James has a theory on how to cure Kurt's sulfur aversion. It's to get him to drink German wines. So maybe we should task Brian with that. We should get Brian to introduce Kurt to German wines. So Will's saying he finds the summer releases richer. And this is the leader of the four so far on his palate. There you go.
Very cool.
I'm excited to go back and try them again. It's very different. I don't think it's my favorite in the lineup so far, only because I think I really love that like classic, funky, straight bourbon cask profile, but it is good. And I do like that one.
At this point in time, I can't remember which ones I have and what I don't have. I'm gonna have to look back. Well, I mean, obviously I hope I have one of everything, but I mean, at this point in
Can't have
time.
them all, Sean.
Yeah, I
None of
know.
us can. Rich is saying when he goes back to the nose, there's lemon meringue. And Steve chiming in saying he gets a little bit of sulfur on the empty glass. Steve, that means you've finished your glass, which means you don't have enough for the speed round. But that's okay.
Everyone should have bought 2 kits.
What's that? Everyone, yeah.
Everyone should have bought 2 kits.
That has happened before, and I don't know. I'm not a big fan of that unless there's 2 people drinking, because otherwise you've just taken that opportunity from somebody else. But anyway, we won't go down that road. Oh, we only poured half. There you go. So we're good. So yeah, Asia release. I'm just looking this one up on Whiskey Base. 4 bourbon barrels, 1 Oloroso sherry butt. And there's mention of coal gas on here. So I don't know if that's maybe a hint that it's going in that direction. Sweaty as well too. Yeah, I would say that more than one of these ones could be accused of being a touch sweaty, but that's okay. I mean, I think that's part of that funky profile that we like. All right, let's go on to the Kensington cask, which seems like yesterday we still had it, and not anymore. It's gone. It's been gone for a while now. Daftmill 2008 cask number 20. As Sean alluded before, it was not the cask we thought we were getting, but it still ended up being pretty bloody good. So
Honestly, the only reason why I suspected they were being dishonest is because shortly after we received ours, there was a Berry Brothers exclusive cask popping up on auctions that was pitch black.
well, but the sample we had was not that dark. I mean, it had color. But also I think the most likely explanation is just we were sent the wrong sample. Because we were undoubtedly sent a sherry sample, but what are you going to do?
Yeah.
So this was a 13-year-old from 2008, 56.8%, first fill X bourbon. This was quite a feather in our cap when we got it. As I said, we started getting strange emails and web orders from people in Europe who are desperate to get it because the single casks that show up over there sell out very quickly. Ours takes a little bit longer because of the nature of the market and the fact that, we don't break interprovincial shipping laws. So, it's going to take its time to sell, but yeah, very, very cool. It's been a while since I've nosed or tasted this one. I mean, I don't think I've probably tasted this since I don't know, like late last year. Like, do you remember when this came through, Sean? Was it last fall that we had this, or was it last spring?
It wouldn't have. Well, if it was last spring, it was like spring 2023. If not, then it would have been
2022, you mean?
around.
2022.
I don't think it was that far back.
It just took forever to get to us.
Yeah.
So lots of malt again, kind of going into granola tones. It's still floral.
This one's got this really clean, I'm not gonna say pool water, but there's something in pool water that makes it a very a sharp nose that's kind of here. I'm not really sure what that is.
You mean ozone?
Yeah, maybe it's ozone. I'm not. Yeah, I don't know.
So Walter the dog just woke up from somewhere. He was stuck. The palate, it's creamy, citrus, melons, apricots, very pretty. Want to talk about the EV? Does this taste like it's cask strength, like 56.8%? Or feel?
It barely tops up over some of the other ones on the
Yeah,
palate. Oh man, I'm so glad we get to revisit this. Holy.
yeah. This is one of those ones where even staff were like, can I have another? And it's like, no, you get your two. That's what everybody else is allowed to have. No more. But I think we've got a few bottles tucked away for tastings in the future. So this whiskey might crop up once or twice more. I'm getting well, I don't drink tea a lot because it doesn't, have the same impact as coffee. But when I do drink tea in the UK and I put a bunch of demerara sugar in it to make it more palatable, this reminds me of the dregs of your tea and those little crystals of demerara sugar at the bottom.
The palate, it's a little bit more. I think the acidity is a little bit more there. It's reminding me a little bit more of a sour porridge, and then a little bit more fruit kind of ladled on top, like syrupy fruits.
Mm-hmm. My original tasting note talks about certs, cola, and nibs. So, I mean, I can see that kind of like that cherry, but it's also got almost like a cool floral mintiness to it too. Oh man. I don't know if anyone's added water. I don't want to add water to mine because I just love how it's drinking. That last sip started to go into those nice creamy, funky, cheese rind. Like some of those creamier cheeses, but with the rind on them as well too. Earthy. Man. When is, or who is the greediest KWM staff member? The greediest whiskey sales agent? Oh man, those are questions. Those are interesting questions. Greediest KWM staff member. I think that would be a tough one to answer. I mean, I could point fingers at myself as being whiskey hoarder number one, but I also try to, as Sean knows, I do deny myself things out of broader fairness to the customer base, because I can't let myself have everything and then have people not get things. So no one gets everything they want at the shop, including the owner, out of principle. But the greediest agent, that's a tough one. I don't know that if we have a greediest agent.
I think he meant sales agent, like on the floor.
Oh,
Maybe.
could be. I mean, I'm not going to point fingers at my staff for who's greediest amongst them, but
Oh no, he does mean reps. Oh,
he does mean reps. I don't know that that's really a thing in our shop.
I also have an answer to that, but I can't say.
Oh, Sean can't say that. All right. Well,
That's
I
not
want to hear that
not
later.
a fair question.
Yeah, that's a tough question. We will say it's not James though, who is a rep and a rather good dude. But it's definitely not James.
Oh no, absolutely not. Yeah, no, not even by a long shot.
Yeah. Cool. All right, let's move on to the 15 year, and then we can go back and do speed round. Before we do, or if you guys want to start nosing and tasting it, allow me to just see here if I've got any other good photos to share. Oh yeah, this is one of the things I love. Again, because Patrick runs his distillery the way he wants to, not too concerned about how other people view that. One of the things he's got here is this device here for measuring volumes. And it's literally an old Fortnum and Mason's tea box that goes up and down the string in a chute he made himself, sandwiched, taped together. These are some of the instruments he's using. And as I said, he's tracking all this info, and I have no idea, whether he's using that to tweak or improve his things, or if he's just meticulous and constantly recording all the details. But there's a little shot of him there. This is probably the moment when I asked him like what the plans were, what he would do differently if he could change anything. And actually, that was probably one of the most interesting questions I asked him, because he said the one thing he would do differently, if he could do one thing differently, would be to put in more automation for cleaning. And it's not even really that much automation, but after he's emptied his washbacks, he's got to wash them out by hand. And there are very simple and relatively inexpensive pieces of kit that can do this for you. It's as simple as turning a valve, and this pressure washer nozzle will spin around and scour the inside of your washback. But he doesn't have to do that, so he has to do it by hand. And those are things that adds hours to his day that he now recognizes don't bring value to the production of the whiskey. And I guess if I left you with one impression, one overriding thing to consider about this, is that everything about this distillery is done from the perspective of making a whiskey that he feels proud of, that he's happy to drink, and that he's so passionate about it that he's controlling how it's done. And that's why he's unwilling to let other people do it. But the only thing that he would change are the things that would, maybe shorten his days by an hour or two, so that he didn't have to worry about cleaning this or scrubbing out that. And it's purely a practical thing more than anything else. So very, very cool. All right, let's go to Daftmill 15-year-old. Where are you here? This is the only one currently available in the shop. In fact, he was a little surprised that we still had it because it's sold out everywhere else. But I mean, the reason we have it is, again, because we were given the full allocation as opposed to just a handful of cases, and we are grateful for that. So I'll share my screen here and the link. Here we go. Oh, not that, this one.
I think as well, like aside from our cask, it seems like we received more of this than pretty much any other release as well.
Oh yeah, we were very lucky to get the release we did, and who knows what the reasons are for. Maybe one country turned it down. Like, you never know what goes into that. But our partners at Chart and Hobbs who bring this in for us, the guy I deal with basically said, "Hey, I've been offered this. Do you want it?" And the answer is yes. And so here we go, 55.7%. Matured in 28 first fill ex bourbon barrels before bottling at 55.7%. So what do we think about this one, Sean?
This one has a lot more kind of like grain husk, earthy, dusty kind of. Well, maybe it's just sitting because it's sitting in the glass. Tough to say. It's been like an hour now, or well, hour and a half almost. But yeah, but definitely more of that grist, like spent grist kind of note.
It reminds me of Dutch babies. Have you ever made a Dutch baby? Like, it's sort of like an old school traditional kind of skillet pancake like thing. But
I've never had one, but I definitely know what they are. Yeah.
It's reminds me of that on the nose, maybe with a little bit of like powdered sugar and some lemon juice on it too. Very buttery.
Well, immediately on the palate, as soon as I touched it, I got a whiff of peanut butter cups, and it kind of faded away into something else.
Oh, that's such a good call. Because it reminds me of like, yeah, like a Reese's peanut pieces or a Reese's cups, like ice cream, something like that, where you take Reese's cups. It's very creamy, loads of vanilla, but that peanut note in there is solid, but there's also this nice chocolatiness.
Wow, that's such a cool departure from every other dram we've had tonight. This is neat.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about this before. I mean, there's one bourbon brand in the States that seems to have an especially peanutty profile, and it's Jim Beam. And it's such a big note that it really comes through in a lot of the actual single malts that are matured in it, especially first fill single malts. So, I mean, it does make you wonder if like there's a high proportion of Jim Beam casks in this.
Yeah, good call. Interesting. Yeah, that'd be really neat to explore. Well, like we could explore further, but yeah.
It's funky, but I don't know if it's as cheesy as some of the other ones we've had.
Will said Ovaltine. It's a cool note. My mom used to have Ovaltine back in the day, and I haven't had it for probably, I'm gonna say 25 years. So I can't really remember what it's all about.
Yeah. I honestly couldn't tell you what Ovaltine is or tastes like. I know the name because like it's cropped up in people's tasting notes from time to time or in popular culture, but I have no idea what that tastes like. I'm wondering if it's like, I don't know. I don't even know what like Pepto-Bismol or something. What, I don't even know what it's for. What's it for? Is it for like heartburn?
I'm not sure. Like it's not I don't think it's a fiber supplement. Wasn't it like, I wonder if it's something like, just speculating, a wartime thing when chocolate and coffee weren't as common. That's my guess.
Just a drink as far as Sammy knows. Okay. A wartime thing. So it was a way of providing cheap hot chocolate. Coffee crisp is the note that goes with it. Okay, well, that's not that far removed from like, peanut butter cup ice cream where you're getting the chocolate and the vanilla in there too. Oh man, loads of honey, some nice granola tones, some nice layers to this. Now, Sean, I may very soon have to temporarily depart to deal with dog because Jen's not home tonight and he seems to be in a bit of a mood. I'm trying to figure out what he's after right now. But do you want to maybe finish off on that one and then we'll maybe start on the next? But I'm going to have to take off for just a couple minutes here.
Yeah, no worries. Well, by next, I guess we're talking like if anyone's got anything left in their glasses, like maybe just a quick speed run through to see if anything's changed. I totally don't blame you if you have nothing left in the glass. I'm kind of surprised I was able to leave anything, but either way. as Andrew was kind of going through like the stills and like you talking about the elongated still heads and whatnot, I couldn't help but flash back. Like we were random anecdote, don't mind me, but we were in Scotland in October and we visited probably like, well, the proper tours we probably did about eight to 10. And the one thing that stuck in my head was every time they were telling us about some part of the thing, it was always, now we do long fermentations for a fruity spirit, or the other one is like, now we have a long still neck for a fruity spirit. Like, now we tip our line arms up for a fruity spirit. It's like, well, we tip our line arms down for a fruitier spirit. It's like, well, we have purifiers it's so funny. And I don't know. Anyways, that it popped into my head as we were going through the still picks there, but yeah, pretty funny.
One of the things I've actually had people ask me if I have any intention of taking people on distillery tours again. And for the longest time, my answer is I'm too busy with the shop. But actually, I have a more proper answer now, and the answer is no. I learned while showing Sean around, which was fun. It was great to take Sean around and for him to see distilleries. I hate touring distilleries now. I hate going through the canned speech and program about converting the starches to sugars and how their process is unique. And it's just like, shoot me in the head. I never want to go do those again. I will go to a distillery I've never been to and walk around it, but I don't want to do the tour. And Sean, it's because like you said, it's all, most of it is so oversimplified and toned down and vague that it's virtually meaningless, because those fruity tones can be influenced by the stills, but it's as much about how the stills are run as opposed to the way they're shaped. And then other things like the fermentation probably play more of a role into how fruity and how estery your spirit is than anything else. So, but yeah. Incidentally, if any of you were wondering if I'm ever going to do distillery tours again, the answer is no. So Kurt might do them. Maybe Sean will want to do them at some point in time. You never know.
Yeah, maybe.
But
Todd and Shannon did ask if you were going to do something maybe more custom. And I know maybe you have something to say to that, because I know you were trying to like, which channels you're reaching through when you're organizing ours also kind of affected things.
Oh yeah, I mean, part of it too, like for me, like in the last 6-7 years, it's been more about going to see people I need to see because I want to do business with them, rather than because I want to see a distillery I've never been to before. But I mean, to be totally honest with you, I could do that if I had a book, and while everybody else went and did the tour, I could just sit somewhere comfortable and read my book. That would be fine. Or answer some emails. Sean and I did a few speed tours where I'm like, look, we know everything. Don't take this the wrong way. We just want to know what's different and a little bit about your history. And that's it. Other than that, we can just walk through. If it takes more than 15 minutes, that's probably too long. And some of them get offended because, they want to like romance you about their thing. But after a while, it just becomes way too inane. You can't do it. All right. We're going to try to accomplish a speed round here while Walter is busy working on his bone and somewhat under control. So back to that 2007 winter batch. I'm glad we did this one first. It's floral, vanilla, soft fruits, really, really delicate, elegant.
I don't find it's changed too much since like the last I spoke of it, which is probably about half an hour ago now.
And the palette is just fruit, funk, and fun. In some ways it's not the most kind of rich, intense, or complex, but I love all the little pieces that are there in that. And yeah, I would be more than happy to drink a bottle of that again.
I love it. Yeah. And I was going side by side with the 08 summer. The 08 summer, okay, so it didn't show up as clearly at the beginning, but there's times where I can almost like look at this as like, well, was there worm tubs involved? Or like there's like that weird tangy, not sulfury, but definitely like that tangy acidity and slight sourness that I get sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But only on the nose. I'm not sure about the palate, I guess.
We'll say no offense to the summer and winter offerings, but the Cask Strength offerings are markedly better. You know, I think Will, with a lot of those, my comment would be is that it's more about, rather than better, it's just a concentration. And I think for people that get used to Cask Strength whiskeys, you prefer that concentration of flavor that's there, because essentially when you're diluting it down to 40 or 43 or 46, you're just diluting it. Like, that's essentially what you're doing. There are some other changes that happen, but you're making it, those flavors, a bit more disparate and less concentrated. And like, that's why people like Cask Strength. But I would say that first one, man, I'd be happy drinking that. I think the Cask Strength ones, you know, I'd have a glass or two, but I don't know that I could sit and session one of those whiskeys, where that first one I could happily sit and session it. All right, 2008 summer.
Or that was summer is the second one, right?
Summer's the second.
Wait. Oh yeah. Oh, I thought we were already talking about that one. No.
No. Oh, you were one ahead of me, were you?
Oh yeah. I was comparing the two. That's why, right?
Honestly, well, I shan't say, but because I think we've got a vote coming up. I'm assuming Evan set up a poll. Nope, he didn't set up a poll. So we're making an unofficial poll, maybe, or we'll let people just vote later. Or maybe I can, you know what, I'll pull a poll together. What are your thoughts on the summer one, Sean?
Honestly, I mentioned in the early here, but this is it's tangier. There's acidity to it and a slight tartness that it's super interesting, because it's completely different than the other. Pretty much it's because it's not sherry, it's not wine, but it's definitely like in that slight sour kind of tone to it. So neat. And I'm guessing it's, what is it, summer versus, do we have other summers? This is the only summer I guess we have, isn't it? Oh no, we have one more. Oh, but it's covered by sherry, so can't really do any more diving other than that. But I wonder if there's a correlation. We'll have to taste more, right? I need more winter casks and more summer releases.
Well, I think we've also got a question that I'm going to have to go back to and ask Patrick about is, are the releases, you know, made from distillates from the seasons, or is it more just you're doing a bottling in the winter, so you're calling it the winter release? I think that's a question that we need to go back and get some clarification on.
That's a good point.
And I can do that. We have the powers to do that. Anyway, I am just quickly typing together a poll here. Sean, why don't we go on and do the winter 2008? How has it changed or evolved?
Interesting. This has become a little like baby powderish, maybe like.
Well, I can see that. Like a little talcum.
Yeah, or maybe like a clean diaper or something like that for if you'll excuse the unfortunate note.
That's a note that I've not had a lot of experience with in recent years, so I'll take your word on it. I mean, it's good. I feel like it's not held up as well as the first one did to my palate, but
yeah, I agree. It didn't maintain a lot of it, much of its robustness. It's still there. You kind of see what it is, but it's kind of faded. The fruits have kind of faded.
All right. I've only created one poll. We'll just repeat it rather than type everything out twice. What about the 2009 summer? How do you think that's fared since we went through the first time? It's mega spicy again.
Yeah, some of that blatant whininess is kind of blown off.
Yeah, it wasn't as meaty as before. The palate's got a nice balance to it now. Still earthy, fruity, spicy. The citrus is still creeping in. Yeah, still drinking well, but I've still got a favorite in my mind. I'm not going to tell anyone until they've had their vote, but
I think that actually does really benefit from time in the glass, though.
It softens nicely. Oh, Igor number 2 says summer 2008 reminds me of Kleinlich. So
Interesting.
Igor, how come you're not Igor number 1? Just want to make sure you're not selling yourself short. That's all. What else have we got here in the comments? Travis saying if he starts buying from auction, his wife is going to kill him. Yeah, fair. Okay, 2008 KWM single cask. That one's still showing nicely.
Oh, that's why you're referencing Igor, right? Other
know.
Igor.
But Igor, you can still be Igor number 1. Why can't you both be number 1? Oh man. It's very beery. It reminds me of like warm German and Czech Pilsners.
Oh, interesting. Very cool. Very fresh. It's less fruity and more barley driven than when I originally started tasting it.
But when you get to the palate, the fruit's still there. Fruit, malt, funk, some nice soft spices. Oh. It may not have been the cask we thought we were getting, but it's still pretty damn good.
Oh, yeah, it's really good. You know, this actually has a little bit of I'm kind of this, it doesn't say winter or summer, but this actually has some qualities of number 2, but then it's kind of amped up with fruit and texture. Interesting. So I am getting a little, just like a hint of that slightly kind of sour-like tone that I mentioned, but there's these layers of white chocolate and almost confectionery that are kind of laying on top of it that kind of cover it up and complement it, and a little bit of everything. Cool.
Yeah. So Sean, I believe the cask was from April. So this would have been a winter, quote unquote, winter distillation.
I guess that makes sense then. Doesn't it? Oh, no, it doesn't make sense yet. No. Hypothesis ruined.
Sorry, everybody. Dog is getting stir crazy here. All right, on to the 15-year. Oh man, that's
Rich, we short-circuited your brain. Nice. Those are good reactions.
Yeah. This is the reason why there's temporary noises and stuff.
Little troublemaker.
He's not a whiskey dog. I think that's still showing really well too. It's got a little bit of maturity to it, some softness to it, a bit of decadence. It's lovely.
Still super, yeah, still super gristful. Maybe hints of like, I'm not sure if this is the one I mentioned, like a pool water / ozone, but there's definitely a bit of a plasticky kind of like note that's kind of coming out. Not in a negative way, of course, but.
All right, I'm going to fire up the poll here. So you all get, you're going to get 2 votes. So we're going to run the first one for a few minutes, and then we're going to run the second one. So because I'm just going to run the same poll twice, you'll have to go through and vote now. And while they're doing that, Sean, and again, partly just so that, oh man, sorry about is the barking? Yeah.
Okay, so sorry. So I'm gonna give you my 1 and 2 here, hey? Oh shoot, I don't know. I think 2007 winter was my favorite. That was number 1 for me. I don't know if you wanted number 2 or number 1 first, but that's okay. And then number 2, I think I'm gonna have to say our cask, honestly.
Sorry, Sean, which was your favorite?
Sorry, my number one was the 2007 winter, the first one. And number two is our cask.
Ah, baller.
Kind of different areas, different reasons and whatnot. Like being a beer lover, there's definitely like a nostalgia bit to the to our cask, sorry, the grain forwardness of our cask really kind of like spoke to me there, but like that fruity, light, delicate, pretty floral over the first one is like, that's my jam right there.
Yeah, so interesting round one results. The Kensington cask was number one. And then the 2007 winter tied with the 2008 winter for second place. So we're going to let that run one more time, and then I'll share with you guys my favorites. Or sorry, I'm going to rerun it. We're going to rerun that poll. Oh, stop sharing. Let's relaunch the poll. So this time it's for your second favorite. So you're going to get to vote for your second favorite this time. And do apologize for the dog. Normally Jen's home by this time and able to control him when he has his 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. Zoomies. So it looks like the votes are trickling in there. Most of you voted. Sean, I'm kind of on the same page with you tonight. That 2007 winter batch, the first one, really spoke to me. I just love the balance of the fruit, the floral, the funk in it. It's a really, really cool bottling. I'm really torn though between our cask and the 15-year, because I like both of them and I like the maturity that the 15-year has in it. But I think I'm going to side with you. I think I like the cask better as well. So results of the second poll, second favorite, here we go. I'm going to share them. Sean, if you want to go over those for a moment with everybody, I'm going to just let the dog out and I'll be right back.
This is the second one, I believe, right? Okay, so the second one is kind of on par with the 2007, the first one, and then after that is our cask. Will, you mentioned what was the what was the retail price? Did Andrew leave a link there, and did it have a price on it? I don't know if I can go that far. I can tell you, it was over 2, and I think it was 270 maybe. I'm gonna guess and say it was around 270 for our cask. And funny enough, like if it speaks at all with any kind of demand, our cask, when we received it, we had calls from literally all over the world saying, how can I buy a bottle? How can you get it to me? And of course, the answer is like, we can't. Like, it's outside of the country is not really something we've really thought of doing. And it was kind of tough, but yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm okay with our cast coming in second place for the second one, but yeah.
Who isn't? Before we wrap, I just wanted to see if anyone else had any questions that maybe we missed or we didn't get to. And Sean, did you get to Will's price? I think
I couldn't remember. I thought it was like, was it 250 or 270?
It was it must
now
have been
250 is ringing a bell.
50. I'm just looking here. It was 260. It was 260 when we last had it.
Split the difference.
So, yeah. I mean, it was pricey, one of our pricier single casks, but again, like super rare, super limited. And I'm not saying this to suggest anyone to buy bottles, but like the reality is when you look at auction markets, I mean, most of these whiskeys are selling for north of 500, the equivalent of $500 a bottle, because they're hard to come by and they're limited. So some producers factor that in. I think in the case of Daftmill, Francis has factored in the fact that he's never going to be able to satisfy demand. So he's going to charge a price that he's happy with. And that's where it goes. And, for us, when we're buying a cask, I mean, we always want to get things that are good value because, we're looking for that ourselves. But that value, I guess, price matrix is subjective. And in the case of something like that Daftmill cask, I mean, there's there's a different value in that than there are in other things. And it was on the expensive side, but I still think it was a cool opportunity to be able to have something like that, which not a lot of other people did. Before we wrap, I do want to apologize for the barking. Walter was a little excited tonight.